rude. I'll ask them to leave if they are. Don't be rude to my visitor who's here to talk about the First Amendment. He's got freedom of speech, you've got it, but not now. Don't use it now. Listen, pay attention, give him respect. This guy's worked really hard to bring First Amendment rights to you in Nogales. So I therefore expect that you will give attention. If I ask you to leave, please just stand up and go back to your class. Okay, don't argue with me.
Well, thanks for having me here today. I'm very happy to be speaking here at Pierson. I was here last November, no, 2 Novembers ago, and I'm back, and this being George Thompson's last year at Pierson, maybe my last year. My presentation today is about censorship and how censorship works here in Nogales. If you could clear the way to the camera. I'm recording this so that I can have a record of this lecture and hopefully distribute it. Now, I don't want to record any of your faces without your permission, so that's why the cameras are just directed on me. If you could get out of the way of the camera, please. Thanks. So I've done a lot of primary research, that is my own research right here in town, about how censorship works here in Nogales. And before I get into that, I want to give you some background, some theory, and also just to get the presentation going, just get some of your ideas. So for example, what if Clear Channel? Do you know what Clear Channel Outdoors is? It's a corporation that runs all of our billboards here in Nogales, especially along the railroad tracks. It operates out of Tucson and Phoenix. It's a nationwide company. Now imagine for a minute that this company said you can have a billboard for a month for free. What would you put on that billboard?
Legal ed.
Legal ed. Anybody else? Any other ideas?
My face.
Your face. You promote yourself. Maybe you're a politician and you're promoting yourself for election or something like that. Any other ideas?
Cancer.
What's that?
My socks.
Put a picture of your socks on the billboard. That's very entertaining. What I want to impress upon you is that freedom of speech is power. Budweiser understands that, and I hope you understand that. People pay a lot of money for freedom of speech. One of these billboards, the small ones on Grand Avenue, cost $500 a month. Those are the smaller unlit signs. So, and you have to sign a 6-month lease, so that's $3 grand up in smoke for a billboard. Now, let's get into some theory, some background theory. I want to illustrate to you the difference between freedom and security. Imagine, can you advance that, please? Okay, one more, please.
Wait, that way?
Yes. Imagine for a minute that there were no laws and no police and you could do anything you want. That's ultimate freedom, yes? But very little security because nobody's protecting you. There's no laws to protect you. Okay? Now imagine the opposite situation where there were laws against everything and you had your own personal policeman to go around with you everywhere. Well, that's no freedom at all, but perfect security because he's there to protect you. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that freedom and security are not the same. In fact, they may be opposites. So if you want freedom, you may have to sacrifice security. If you want security, you may have to sacrifice freedom. And that's the big question is, how much security are you willing to sacrifice to have your freedom? Or how much freedom are you willing to sacrifice to have your security? And this is one of the questions that the Constitution of the United States addresses. Because the United States Constitution specifically limits the amount of power that the government has. Now, if the government is there to protect you and the government doesn't have as much power as it could, then perhaps the government can't protect you as much as it can, as theoretically it could if it had all the power in the world, right? So this is a bit of the theory behind freedom of speech, the Constitution and the balance of freedom versus security. Now, talking specifically about censorship, there's actually 2 kinds of censorship that I'd like to illustrate here. Next slide, please. There is public censorship where the government is censoring you. And then there's private censorship where individuals and businesses are censoring you. And there's a very big difference between these 2 kinds of censorship because the First Amendment prevents the government from censoring us, but it does not prevent us from censoring each other. For example, if you own a billboard and I want to rent it from you, you don't have to rent it to me if you don't want to, right? It's your billboard. That's called property rights. It's your property, And you can do what you want with your property, including any media channels you may own, any newspapers you own, any television channels you own, billboards, etc. So property rights are in balance with the First Amendment, freedom of speech. The government cannot censor us directly, but private entities like corporations and individuals can censor us when they're using their own property for propaganda and publicity. Okay? So what I'm getting at here is this is how censorship works in Nogales, through private censorship. That is, private individuals and businesses do the censorship, not so much the government. Okay? Next slide, please. What is a person? Now this may sound like a very stupid question. I mean, we're all here, we're all persons, we're all people, and we think we know what a person is. However, from a legal point of view, this was never a very, this was actually has been a very difficult question legally over the years. The Civil War, the United States fought a civil war in the 1860s, largely about who is a person. Because legally, slaves were not people, they were property, right? And so the Civil War was largely fought between the North, which was against slavery, and the South, which was largely for slavery. At least the rich people who owned the slaves were for slavery. So at that time, slaves were not persons, they were property. And that war was fought, the most bloody war in American history to date, was fought largely to determine who is a person. And at the end of that war, there were constitutional amendments passed to grant freedom to the slaves. Freedom and civil rights to the slaves. And one of those amendments was the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says that no state may deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That is to say, you have to treat everyone equally. If you're in Alabama, you have to treat the black people the same as the white people. That was the amendment. And at that time, the South was under occupation. It wasn't even part of the country. It was a foreign country that was occupied by the North when this amendment was passed. Now, just 20 years later, the Supreme Court decided that, hey, corporations are people too, and you cannot treat them any differently. You have to give them rights as well, because they are persons. Legally, corporations are persons. Now this, to me, is a legal fraud. This is obscene, it's disgusting, and it's largely why I'm here today talking to you. Because 20 years after this amendment, corporations become people, and yet blacks in the South had to wait a whole century for this amendment to actually apply to them on the ground, that is, in the states where they live. The right to vote, to speak and assemble, and so forth. So, what I want to impress upon you is that a legal amendment to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, has been perverted and used to give personhood to corporations, and that is a great advantage to them. If you wonder why corporations have so much power and influence in our society, it's partly due to this, that they have legal rights as persons. Okay, next slide, please. Now, let's move on. What is a corporation? A corporation is just a legal creation. It's something you create legally by filling out some paperwork with a lawyer, and you get together a president, a treasurer, and a secretary, and you declare yourself to be a corporation. It's very easy. It only costs a few $100s. Any of you could do it when you turn 18. But creating the corporation on paper is one thing. Actually operating a profitable corporation is quite another. Okay, so we can, any of us can create them. Whether or not it's successful as a business is another question. Now, what is the structure of a corporation? There are the owners, or the stockholders. Those stockholders choose a board of directors, and those board of directors choose a president and the principal officers of the company. One of the great advantages of a corporation is that it permits personal profit without personal liability. This is another great legal advantage that corporations have, which you and I do not have. You and I are legally responsible for everything that we do, or at least when you turn 18, your age of majority. You become legally responsible for everything you do. People can sue you, you can be charged with crimes, you can be incarcerated. corporations, the owners, the stockholders of corporations are not legally responsible for what the corporation does. Here's an example. Let's say you wanted to drill for oil in the Gulf of Mexico. You got all the money together, you bought the equipment, you hired the engineers and the workers, and I'm talking millions of dollars in investment here, but you personally got that business together and you are the sole proprietor of that business and you go drill for oil in the Gulf of Mexico. Let's say you strike oil and you start pumping, you start making millions of dollars, you pay back your investment, and over 2 or 3 years you double your money, you triple your money. Okay, that's all well and good. Then your oil rig blows up, a huge explosion, people die. This actually happened, of course, you remember a year or two ago. Now, what happens to all that money that you've made? Well, you, being the sole proprietor of that company, are legally responsible for what the company does. Therefore, the government and the people who can sue you for damages can come after your house, your car, your bank accounts, any stock you own. So, let's back up to square one and do it the smart way, the way everyone does it. You form a corporation. You are the owner of that corporation because you own the majority of the stock. You choose a board of directors. You may appoint appoint a president, and so forth. Now you go back to the Gulf of Mexico and you're drilling for oil. You make millions of dollars. The revenue from that company passes to you in the form of dividends as the principal stockholder of the corporation. However, when the oil rig blows up and you ruin the habitat in the Gulf of Mexico and people die, you are not personally liable for that. And the money that you have in the bank from all those good years is untouchable by anybody. Your house, your car, all your cars, your luxury cars, all your bank accounts, those are untouchable because those belong to you personally. The corporation is a separate legal entity. So it serves as a buffer or front for people to operate behind and protect themselves legally. So you can see this creates a moral hazard. Do you know what a moral hazard is? A moral hazard is a situation where crime may pay, where doing the wrong thing may end up turning out right for you. That's a moral hazard. And I would say that corporations are structurally, legally, a moral hazard because it protects the owners from liability for the very things that they are profiting from. So again, do you wonder why corporations have so much power and influence? Because they have legal advantages that you and I do not have. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay, there was a recent ruling in 2010 from the Supreme Court called Citizens United. And this is one of those infamous rulings that are very unpopular, like Dred Scott or perhaps Roe versus Wade, where the court decided that corporations and unions, being persons under the Constitution, have freedom of speech, and that freedom of speech cannot be curtailed. So now that we have elections coming up, excuse me, we have elections coming up in the fall, and in this election cycle, corporations can buy advertising to the tune of millions of dollars, and that is all protected. That is all legal and protected. What we have in this country are attempts at election reform where they've attempted to curtail the influence of money in elections. They've tried to prevent corporations from spending money on advertising for elections, and the Supreme Court has said that that cannot happen. That corporations have unlimited freedom of speech because they are persons legally. And remember, they are persons because of a constitutional amendment that was passed for the slaves more than 100 years ago. Corporations are persons because we tried to free the slaves, but actually we ended up empowering the corporations. That's kind of messed up. Yes? And I never heard about this in high school, and that's why I'm here today talking to you. Because I think it's a crucial part of any high school curriculum, and it was not part of mine, and I'm very upset about that. Okay? So that's why one of the reasons I'm here today. Next slide, please. Okay. Now let's get into some of the research that I've done right here in Nogales. As I mentioned before, these are the offices of Clear Channel in Tucson. One of the smaller billboards on Grand Avenue costs $3,000 for 6 months, or $500 a month, but you have to sign and pay for the whole 6 months at a time. Yeah, you have? Next slide, please. Now, excuse me, can I have it quiet in here, please? Clear Channel owns the billboards, so they decide who gets to rent them, yes? Yeah. And they have decided that Senator McCain can promote his political ideas on their billboards. Here's an example up in Tucson. I think Another Man's Treasure is on Speedway. And you'll notice the serial number. This is the serial number for the billboard that identifies which billboard it is. Now, Senator McCain can rent his billboard and present his political ideas, promote himself and his political ideas. Next slide, please. They told me, no, I cannot have this billboard. So I have my political ideas, which I cannot promote on these billboards. Why? It took me a year to find out. After they told, it took them less than an hour to tell me no, but it took them an entire year to tell me why. And I had to ask them over and over and over again, and eventually I talked to Diane Verez, who's the president of the Arizona division in Phoenix. Hi, Diane. She's not here, but she will be seeing this video. And she said, after a year of getting stonewalled and getting blown off and getting the runaround, she said, oh, we are not legally able to do tobacco advertising, therefore we choose not to do marijuana advertising. And I said, well, I'm not advertising marijuana, I'm proposing that marijuana be legalized. It's a different thing. So she said, well, we don't do that, and we don't do strip clubs. So tobacco, marijuana, and strip clubs we don't do. So I said, well, I've got other ideas for billboards, and I sent them some other ideas. And they stopped talking to me. They will not respond to me. So I believe at this point I've been essentially blacklisted by Clear Channel in Arizona.
Maybe you should try fighting for your rights.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to demonstrate how difficult it is, because they own the billboards. So,
get up against the Supreme Court, man.
Well, that's a very good question. That's a very good point. Property rights are not absolute. If you remember, in the 1950s in the South, we had segregation. Restaurants would say, no blacks allowed. And if they wanted to keep blacks out of their restaurant, they could. It was their property. Then laws were passed and things changed, and now we have anti-discrimination laws that prevent that kind of discrimination in all 50 states. So property rights are not absolute. And you're right, politicians could pass laws that says, if you are going to have political advertising on your billboards, then you must give political advertising to everyone who can pay for it. That would be a law, but that law is not on the books, and I don't anticipate that politicians will ever do that. So you're right, property rights can be modified and restricted, but in this case, they have not been. So, and I'm not going to lobby for that because I don't think it's going to happen, especially not in Arizona.
Oh, you petition?
Yeah, petitions are just a bunch of signatures on a page. People can look at them, they can throw them in the trash.
Well,
They don't.
that whole Coney 2012 thing is like kind of just one big petition.
Yeah, sometimes they kind of catch fire and they get some traction, but it's all luck basically, whether your petition has any impact or not.
Well, isn't it about we the people?
Well, you're right. Petitions, sometimes they can work, but a lot of times it's just another signature on another page and it really has no impact. It has no legal binding, really, on anybody. So if people want to ignore the petition, they can do that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this just wraps up what I was saying before. Clear Channel will not permit tobacco, marijuana, or table dance advertising. And I sent them other ideas, and they do not respond, so I think at this point, I'm basically blacklisted. They don't want to talk to me. So I guess my money's not green enough for them.
I saw TDs.
Yeah, well, Clear Channel doesn't own all the billboards. Here in Nogales, they have almost a monopoly on billboards. You know what a monopoly is? Yes. A monopoly is when one company controls a product or service in a given market. So here in Nogales, Clear Channel owns at least 90%, if not 99% of the billboards here in town. So if I can't rent from them, I can't rent, basically. Next slide, please. Now, Clear Channel has a lot of local customers who rent billboards from Clear Channel. And they include, well, your former superintendent of your school system, a lady who ran the career center for a while, insurance agents, and the county attorney. They all rent billboards from Clear Channel. Yes, you've seen them. Yes? Well, I said, well, I'm going to ask these people to stand up and help me fight for my freedom of speech. And I wrote to them and I talked to them, and none of them helped me. And in fact, most of them did not even respond to my request. Now, of course, they don't have to respond if they don't want to. I have no way to compel them to do that. But in a country where we say Americans love freedom and we fight for freedom, well, here's 4 people who had the opportunity to fight for freedom, my freedom, and they did nothing at all. And I just want to use that as an example of the amount of solidarity we have for freedom here in Nogales. I would say is about 0, at least from my point of view. Next slide, please. Now, another thing, the last point I want to make about Clear Channel is, you know, the railroad runs through the middle of town, north to south, along Grand Avenue, and along both sides of the railroad is pieces of land that belong to the railroad, and it's much wider than the actual train tracks. So Union Pacific is the railroad that owns those tracks and that land, and they rent places to Clear Channel to put up the billboards. Clear Channel builds the billboards and they own the structures that are the billboards. But the land where the billboards sit belong to Union Pacific. So I had another idea. I said, well, look, I'm going to talk to Union Pacific and tell them what Clear Channel is doing to me. And tell them about censorship and see if they can apply some pressure to their tenant, who is Clear Channel, who is renting land for them. And I talked to them. In fact, I talked to a fellow in Omaha who is in charge of the real estate division of the western section of the United States for Union Pacific. And I told him what was going on, and he could care less, basically. So here you have a situation where 2 corporations are cooperating to make censorship happen. Okay? Union Pacific knows that Clear Channel is censoring me and probably other people, and they do not care. They continue to have an exclusive arrangement with Clear Channel throughout the Union Pacific rail network in the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, let's move on to another. This is a little closer to my heart because this is the bus shelters. The bus shelters were constructed in about the year 2000 by a company that's now called AdVision in Tucson. And there's a contract between the city of Nogales and AdVision to build and maintain and operate these bus shelters. Originally, I tried to rent one of these bus shelters, and they said, well, we can't let you do any political advertising or advocacy because our contract with the city of Nogales prohibits that kind of advertising. So I asked the city for the contract, and after 8 months they finally found it and gave it to me, and I looked at the contract and it doesn't contain any provisions as to what kind of advertising is permitted. So I talked to them again, and by that time the lady had left the company, and I talked to one of the owners, Marv Kirchler. Marv, he's not here today, but he'll be seeing this video. And he said, well, no, we worked that out with the city attorney after the contract was signed, and I think I may have the notes for those meetings, and I'll tell my employees to look for them. And I believe there is some provision for First Amendment rights. That is, there is provisions for political advertising in the bus shelters. Well, he never called back, and he never got back to me. And finally, I called him, and by that time, he was upset with me. So, you know, at that point, the whole relationship went south. So basically, nobody really knows what kind of advertising is permitted in these shelters. I have written to the city attorney about it, Jose Machado. Jose, not here today, but he'll be seeing this video. I wrote to him in August about this, and he has never written back. He's never responded in any way. So that's, which I have found is pretty typical for City Hall. They generally don't respond to correspondence. Next slide, please. This is their offices up in Tucson, off Speedway and Anita, right by I-10. Pretty dumpy offices. They don't really even have a sign out front. Next slide, please. So this is what I said, well, if I can't do political advertising, I'll put in just a general message. Welcome to America, land of the free. They said no. So how free are we? You know, you can't even put up a sign that says this. Another thing that I found out in the contract that AdVision has with the city of Nogales, there is a provision that says the ad revenue that you earn, AdVision earns from renting advertisement, a percentage has to be shared with the city of Nogales. And they have to report every year how much revenue that is and write a check and send it to the city of Nogales. I asked for those annual reports on revenue. And again, the city did not respond to my request for documents. They are legally obligated to respond and provide those documents if they exist, but as is typical for the city of Nogales, they simply do not respond. So after 2 or 3 months, I went to City Hall and I said, look, here's my public documents request. I'm looking for these documents. And I talked to a lady in finance, Jeanette Perales. Jeanette, not here today, but she'll be seeing this video. And she said, what? I've never seen any revenue from AdVision. So AdVision is supposed to be sharing revenue with the city, and according to Jeanette Perales, more than a year ago, it has never done so. And of course, the city was unaware of that until I pointed it out to them, because they couldn't even find the contract with AdVision.
So maybe we should sue these guys.
Yes, suing people costs thousands of dollars.
For them.
Yes. It's nice, if you have a lot of money to burn, it's very nice to go around suing people, but it costs thousands of dollars to do that. So it's thousands of dollars that I don't have.
Let's get someone that's down.
Yes.
What's that? Can you speak up?
We should get someone that's down with it.
Down with what? Never mind. Okay. So what really burns me up about this is the sidewalk is public property. It belongs to us. It belongs to me. It belongs to you. It belongs to all the citizens of Nogales. But it's administered by the city government, but it belongs to us. What has the city government done? It has hired a private company to broadcast propaganda at us and at the same time censor us on our own property. This sidewalk belongs to me. It belongs to you, and yet they're telling us, no, you cannot rent. And yet Budweiser can rent. Budweiser can advertise alcohol to minors and children like yourself. They're not children, minors. Or people who are not eligible to drink. Budweiser is doing that, and that's okay, but they won't rent advertising to me. On my own property, which is the sidewalk. I'm not strictly my own, it belongs to everyone. So that's one of the reasons I'm here today, because I'm pretty pissed off about that. Next slide, please.
I feel
That's it. So about Budweiser, what I want to point out here is when we get done with this presentation, you will see, you will see that really the only bit of freedom of speech that you have in the public space here in Nogales is to stand on the sidewalk with a little cardboard sign and wave it at traffic as the traffic goes by. Okay? Now, what is Budweiser doing? Budweiser loves to advertise in every possible channel or medium. It advertises on television. Well, actually, is beer ads still? You can't advertise beer on television? Yeah, you can, right? On television, on cable, on billboards, on the internet, every possible channel. In fact, Budweiser may spend more. Excuse me. Can I have silence, please? It may be that Budweiser spends more money on advertising than it spends on the ingredients that go in its beer. That's a lot of money. And they do it in every possible channel where the channel is worthwhile, where it's worth the money that they're spending. And you will notice that Budweiser is not standing on the sidewalk and employing people to hold up signs that say Budweiser. So if Budweiser is not doing that, it probably is not worth doing that. Which is to say that the one form of freedom of speech which you and I have here in Nogales isn't worth a damn to Budweiser. Okay? So what I want is just a little piece of what Budweiser has. I just want to rent 1 or 2 of these butt shelters. And I cannot do that. Why? Is it because I'm not a hugely rich and powerful corporation?
Yes.
Is that the reason why?
Yes, it is.
Yes, that's probably why. Is it because I cannot employ, is it because I can't spend millions of dollars to employ dozens and dozens of lawyers?
Yes.
That's probably why. All right, next slide. Okay, this is a good one. Now we're getting down to government censorship, which may be unconstitutional. Here in the city of Nogales, I approached the city government and asked them, is it all right if I put up posters on the lamp poles You've seen posters downtown, I lost my dog, if you see my dog, call me, etc. I asked them about that, and they say, no, actually that's a misdemeanor. It's a crime. So every time you see a poster and someone's name's on it with their number, that is a crime. But the city just chooses not to prosecute or pursue those crimes. Why? Because they don't care about lost dogs and they don't care about those kinds of messages. But if we came up with a publicity campaign and put publicity on all the lampposts around town and the city didn't like what we had to say, they would have a law in their back pocket and they would be able to charge us with a crime under that law. There's another statute, 17.2, which makes it a crime on the sidewalk to hand someone a piece of paper. That is a misdemeanor on the sidewalk.
Why is that a crime?
Because it's a law on the books of the city of Nogales. Now again, the city does not pursue and prosecute these crimes, but they are there, they're on the books in case the city ever wanted to do
So
that.
our type of advertisement is pieces of paper. Their type of advertisement is big billboards and commercials.
Yes, so our city government has many options, and it appears that they want to restrict our freedom of speech as much as possible, while at the same time giving a contract to AdVision to give away our sidewalks to Budweiser and other corporations. And another thing, the director of planning for the city of Nogales has told me that the city of Nogales is exempt from its own ordinances. So for example, here's the police department with a flyer about a graffiti art contest back in 2010. Now this is not a misdemeanor for the police department because according to the director of planning, the city does not have to obey its own laws. We do, but the city of Nogales does not, according to the director of planning, George Liniero. George, not here today, but he'll be seeing this video.
Hi, George.
That sounds outrageous to me, but again, this is just what the director of planning has told me.
That is crazy, man.
Okay, next slide, please.
I'm the joint states from the small bug.
Okay. So basically, it is a crime to put up a poster like this on a lamppost in Nogales. Next. Okay, now we get into bulletin boards within public buildings, like at the post office, at the school district, which is just up in the old high school here. All of these bulletin boards are controlled by the owners of the building. They may be public buildings owned by public entities like the school district or the post office. But most, if not all, of these billboards have policies, whether they are written or displayed or not, where the posters you put up are controlled by the agendas of the people who own the billboards, the bulletin boards. So here is your own school district, and your own school district is restricting your freedom of speech in the school district building, just up the hill here. So I think we've covered just about all of the public space. And why is the public space important? Because we have to live in it. All right? If you get up in the morning and you have to come to school, you have to drive down the road. You have to walk down the sidewalk. If there's a billboard there, you're going to see it. You don't have any choice about that. That's why billboards are so expensive. They are a captive audience. We are the captive audience of billboards. However, if you get up in the morning, you go to work, you go to school, you do not have to look at the newspaper. You do not have to look at a particular web page on the internet or a particular TV channel. You do not have to look at a particular magazine. So that's why the public space is so important. Another thing is, when you see advertisements in the public space, it helps to establish what we think of as normal. Again, the Budweiser advertisements. We think of Budweiser advertisements as being normal because we see them all the time. However, if you and I had the freedom of speech to put up our own propaganda on billboards, then what we had to say would become normal. Just because people would become habituated, would become in the habit of seeing this propaganda. So what we're talking about here is power. Freedom of speech is power. And it appears to me that the corporations and the government want to deprive us of that power. We are the working class, yes? Nogales is a working class town. Yes or no? If we are deprived of freedom of speech, we, the working class, are deprived of power. And is that an accident? Did that happen by accident? What? No, I don't believe it did.
They did it on purpose.
They did it on purpose. Now, let me ask you this. Now that we're talking, I want to talk to you a little bit about the working class. Does the working class in Nogales have any political leadership at all?
No.
Yes or no?
No, we just work.
How about the mayor? Is the mayor a political leader for the working class? What's his plan?
I think he is.
Well, look, what's his plan? What I'm getting at here is, if the working class of Nogales ever grew a spine and actually stood up, we would need freedom of speech in order to mount a political struggle, mount a political campaign. And what I'm trying to demonstrate here is we don't have it. So they're thinking, the corporations and the government are thinking well ahead of us. We're not even, as the working class, we're not even thinking of having a struggle, and they've already got our freedom of speech locked down before we even try to use it. See what I'm saying? So yes, am I cynical about this? Yes. Am I upset about it? Very much. What can we do about it? I don't know.
We should be able to do something.
Yeah. So, I mean, look at Nogales. Nogales has a per capita income in 2000 of $10,000. Our rate of poverty in Nogales is like 1/3 of the people in Nogales live in poverty. What, if anything, is being done about this? Does anybody have a plan? Yes.
Yeah, growth, economic growth.
Economic growth means
There are
more
corporations.
bring in more jobs, more people working at the same wages, earning the same amount of money, same per capita income.
They could get an education, the individuals, and that would rely on the government.
Yes. You're right in the sense that individually some of us may obtain the skills and the education needed to get better jobs and better pay. But that, if everyone were to do that, then the value of those jobs would fall. It's supply and demand. If everyone gets a college degree, the value of a college degree goes down. If everyone gets a master's degree, the value of a master's degree goes down. If everyone gets a doctorate, the value of that doctorate goes down. So what I'm saying is, yes, individually, we may by ones or twos or threes of us, find our way out of the working class by education. But the working class will still be here. The question of how can we earn more than $10,000 a year per capita in Nogales, that question is going to stay with us. And I believe in order to deal with it, you need a labor movement, and in order to have a labor movement, you need freedom of speech. So I'm saying, look at how deep this hole is. They have dug a hole for us that is more than 6 feet deep in terms of censoring our freedom of speech. If ever the working class of Nogales gets a spine and stands up off the ground, this is the bottom of the hole where we're going to be standing. You see what I'm saying? So again, yeah, I'm very upset about this, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about it.
Don't you think do you think it was a conspiracy?
I do not think there's an organized conspiracy. I believe that corporations and government are individually pursuing what they believe to be their best interests. Clear Channel, yes, it could rent a billboard to me, but if I put up a controversial message, it may cause trouble for them, some sort of liability, or it may reduce the value of their billboards. If billboards become a controversial thing or bad thing, other people may not want to rent them. So I believe Clear Channel is pursuing its own best interests as they see it by censoring me. And it's not a conspiracy with the government, and it is a conspiracy with Union Pacific, obviously. They have an exclusive arrangement with Union Pacific, and Union Pacific perpetuates that agreement for decades at a time. So it's a conspiracy of two, at least.
Don't you think they have the right to decide their own property?
Well, again, we'll go back to the South in the 1950s. Property rights are not absolute. Laws can be passed to prevent discrimination, for example, based on race. And yes, if you want to run a restaurant, you have to let everyone come into your restaurant regardless of what color they are. That is now a law. Back before the 1960s, you could exclude people if they were Mexican, if they were black. You could keep them out of your restaurant. And that was legal because the restaurant was your property. But it's not an absolute right. Property rights are not absolute.
Do you think that laws should be passed then that regulate the content of speech?
I think laws should be passed that make a level playing field and do not regulate the contents of the billboard, but if a certain subject matter is allowed on the billboard by the company, for example, Clear Channel, if they allow political advertising on their billboards, for example, Senator McCain, if they allow political advertising for one person, I believe laws are necessary to make them give political advertising to everybody who can pay for it.
Well, you know, I got a lot of respect for your freedom of speech. This is a difficult message to get across. The government's obviously shutting you down. Corporations are obviously shutting you down. We're not shutting you down. The kids are being pretty good. But you have the strength to get out there and use your freedom of speech to bring this message to where it matters, that's the people. Right? I commend you for that, Mr. Lord.
Well, thank you. And any questions at all on any of these topics?
No questions.
No questions. How much more time? How much more time do we have?
Well, we got about 6 minutes. We got to get kids back to class.
Okay.
What? Do you have any questions? Do you have another slide?
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's wait.
One more.
Wait.
One more slide and one more question. I want to.
Calm down, please.
I want to leave you. I want to leave you with a couple questions.
Before you leave, I want you to go up to Mr. Bennings, shake his hand, and say thank you for protecting my freedom of speech by exercising. Shake his hand, say thank you. Mr. Lawrence?
I want to leave you with these questions here. We are told that Americans love freedom and that we fight for freedom and so forth. And one example I'd like to give to you is the Taliban in Afghanistan. We are told that our soldiers are fighting for freedom in Afghanistan. Do you think there is any chance that the Taliban is going to take over Arizona and start telling us what to do? No. Okay. So what I suggest to you is that in order for the Taliban to threaten our freedom, they would have to have the capacity to take over and start bossing us around, yes?
Yes.
Now, I don't believe they have that capacity, so therefore, I don't think that our soldiers are defending our freedom over in Afghanistan. They may be defending our security, but not our freedom.
Friend.
Yes. Well, they may be defending many other interests over there, but freedom, I don't believe, is one of them. So, the questions I'd like to ask you are, do we really love freedom here, from what I've shown you today? Do we really have freedom here in Nogales?
Well, that's true, because you're educating these kids about freedom. So that's true.
Yeah.
That's true, but I've tried to do this in other schools and other classrooms, and I have not been able to. So largely it has to do with Mr. Thompson's interest and concern about the Constitution. Is largely why I'm here.
I want you to have freedom of speech for them. So these guys can see a person speaking their mind and getting across their point. And believe me, what he's saying is really controversial. This is highly controversial. If he's out there trying to legalize it on city billboards in the city, and they're shutting him down, he should. If they're shutting him down, then he's making the freedom of speech real and taking the consequences for it too.
Yeah.
Mr. Lawrence, thank you for what you're doing. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.